Before Vecna snapped bones, opened gateways, or rewrote reality, he was first seen as a quiet, pale, observant boy who disappeared long before Hawkins ever heard his name. Young Henry Creel's story starts not in Indiana, not in the Upside Down, but in Nevada. This lesser-known part of his origin hints at how early his mind began to twist and how long he lived between worlds without anyone noticing. Henry Creel was born different. The show and The First Shadow both confirm he had abilities from a very young age, and they weren't small abilities either. He could sense life. He could sense death. He could feel emotions like radio signals. He saw people the way predators see weak prey. Patterns, flaws, impulses, fears. And even as a kid, he didn't understand why others couldn't see the world the same way he did. That early confusion is important because it planted the seeds for the Vecna we meet decades later. But before he ever reached Hawkins, there was the incident in Nevada. Not everyone knows this part of the timeline, but it matters for understanding every later version of him. The Creel family lived there, and something happened that forced them to leave. Records are vague, almost deliberately vague, but it's clear Henry began showing severe behavioral changes after he went missing from a Nevada cave for 12 hours. During this time, Henry came across a piece of equipment left by a lab scientist, which briefly transported him to Dimension X. This incident altered his blood completely and changed him forever. It's this same cave system where he went missing that we actually see in Season 5. It's featured in Henry's memory Mindscape, being explored by Max and Holly. This disappearance, short as it was, shows the first spark of what Vecna would become. He had no concern for safety, no concern for consequences, no empathy. The world was a puzzle, and people were pieces he could move around. This is the earliest moment where Henry's sense of humanity begins to slip. By the time the Creels moved to Hawkins, the damage was already done. This shaped his moral compass in a permanent way. When he caused pain, the world got quieter. When something died, he felt power, and that stuck with him. Young Henry Creel is the purest version of him, untouched by Brenner, untouched by Hawkins' lab, untouched by revenge or ideology, just an innocent kid corrupted by a greater force. Most villains need a tragic turning point. Henry didn't. His turn started the day he realized no one could stop him. The Nevada vanishing isn't just a footnote, it's the birth of Vecna's worldview. A worldview where people are flawed, weak, and trapped in a system he believes he stands above. When he eventually becomes Vecna, these early ideas return in full force. His monologues about decay, corruption, and the broken nature of the world come from a child who looked at life and saw nothing worth preserving. But the most important thing about this first version is the timeline. Henry vanished years before the Creels ever stepped foot inside the Hawkins house, where everything fell apart. He spent that time alone with his thoughts, his powers, and his growing belief that he was meant for something more. This was the quiet before the storm, the moment where the boy who would become Vecna learned he didn't need to fear anyone. This version of Henry is not dramatic or monstrous yet. No vines, no burned flesh, no hive-mind connections, but he is dangerous. He is studying the world, testing it, and preparing himself for the moment he realizes that everyone around him is not his family, but obstacles. Young Henry Creel is where it all begins, and it sets the tone for every version that comes next. Because this isn't the story of a boy who lost his way. It's the story of a boy who found his purpose too early and without anyone strong enough to stop him. And when the Creel family moved to Hawkins, Henry didn't change. He evolved. Number 2, Henry Creel, the Hawkins horror. If young Henry in Nevada was the spark, then Henry Creel in 1959 is the fire. This is the version of Henry we see in the first Shadow play and the flashbacks in Stranger Things. He isn't Vecna yet, he isn't one yet, but he is already something much darker than a troubled child. By the time the Creel family settles into their new home in Hawkins, Henry's worldview is fully formed, and it is hostile. From the moment the family arrives, Henry studies the house like a predator, sizing up new territory. The Creels believe Hawkins represents a fresh start. Henry sees it as a new environment to test the limits of his power. He explores the attic, the basement, the walls, every quiet place where he can be alone with his thoughts. He observes his father, he watches his mother, he analyzes his sister. He doesn't connect with them, he monitors them. This version of Henry is no longer confused by his abilities. He knows he's different, and for the first time, he wants to use that difference with intention. He experiments on animals in the woods, he practices telepathy on neighbors, he manipulates the electricity in the house with precision. Every time he does it, he feels a sense of order, a sense of clarity. Power isn't a burden anymore, it's structure. The Creel family begins to notice strange things almost immediately. Lights flicker, animals die in the yard. Victor Creel blames a demon, convinced the house is haunted. Virginia Creel knows better. She sees Henry's temper, his cold stare, his detachment from other children. She begins to realize something is very wrong. Henry feels her suspicion, and it terrifies him in the only way he understands. He worries she'll expose him before he's ready. This fear becomes one of the key emotional triggers that leads to the massacre that destroys the Creels. Henry's powers escalate. What started as an incident in Nevada evolved into full sensory overload. He feels everything in the house, every emotion, every pulse, every thought. For Henry, the world becomes unbearable. This leads to one of the most important moments in his evolution, the realization that death isn't destruction to him. It is growth, it is power, it is strength, and he desperately wants to grow stronger. One of the biggest misconceptions is that the house corrupted Henry. It didn't. Henry corrupted the house. He used his powers to project images, distort memories, and manipulate the entire Creel family. The visions they experienced weren't supernatural hauntings, they were psychic attacks. Henry became the ghost that Victor spent years trying to explain. The murders in 1959 are brutal, but the psychology behind them is even worse. Henry doesn't kill his family out of hate, he kills them out of mercy and desire. In his eyes, they're trapped in meaningless routines, driven by rules and expectations that make no sense to him. He sees a world that is broken, weak, and hopeless, and he believes he is the only one strong enough to fix it. Virginia dies first. She is the one who truly understood something was wrong, and Henry needs her silence more than anyone else's. Alice Creel follows. She is innocence and vulnerability, qualities Henry sees as pointless. Victor survives only because Henry wants someone to take the blame. He wants the world to believe that Victor did it, and the world does. But Henry makes one mistake. He pushes himself too far. After killing most of his family, he collapses. His body can't handle the power output. This version of Henry is the ideological seed of Vecna. Every belief Vecna later preaches about decay, about human flaws, about liberation through death, it all comes from the 1959 Henry Creel worldview. He sees humanity as corrupt and fragile. He sees suffering as wasteful. He sees the world as a broken loop that needs correction. But there's something else about Henry at this stage that matters. He is lonely. Not because he wants friends, but because no one else can think like he does. He feels separate from every person around him. That's why he later feels connected to the Mind Flayer's hive. For Henry, isolation isn't a punishment, it's the natural state of someone above everyone else. Henry Creel is not yet the monster we see in the Upside Down. No vines, no burned flesh, no transformation. But he is already a manipulator, a killer, and a boy with a mission. And once he is captured and taken to Hawkins' lab, his next evolution begins. The Henry Creel of 1959 is the blueprint. But when Brenner gets his hands on him, that blueprint turns into a weapon, and that weapon becomes 001, the first experiment. Once the Hawkins lab captures Henry Creel, he stops being a troubled boy and becomes something else entirely, an experiment. Not just any experiment. The first, the blueprint, the origin point of everything that Hawkins lab becomes. Henry Creel is wiped away, and in his place stands Subject DRO, the prototype for a new generation of humans shaped through trauma, control, and psychic warfare. When Brenner first studies Henry, he sees something no other scientist has ever seen. A child with natural abilities that dwarfed anything the lab ever produced artificially. Henry could do extraordinary things without effort, like move objects with absolute precision. Brenner had been trying to create a psychic weapon, but Henry was already one. From the beginning, 01 is treated differently from the other kids. The other children, including 11, are created through forced pregnancy and blood transfusions, but Henry was affected firsthand. Brenner knows this. He knows Henry is powerful beyond prediction. So instead of molding him through kindness, Brenner tries to contain him through fear, medication, and absolute isolation. This period in Henry's life is cold and clinical. It is where he learns how to suppress emotion instead of feel it, where he learns that rules exist only to constrain people weaker than him, where every day is a test of obedience. Brenner gives him a stripped down identity, a number, not a name, a jumpsuit, not clothing, a cell, not a room. Everything about Henry's humanity is removed piece by piece until he becomes a controlled psychic instrument. But Henry is not broken. He is patient. He studies the lab the way he once studied his family. He learns patterns, door codes, guard rotations, emotional weaknesses. He learns Brenner's limits, fears, and goals. And underneath that calm, Henry is planning, waiting, growing stronger. He also learns about his own power during this period in ways he never understood before. The lab forces him through sensory deprivation experiments where he is submerged in dark water tanks, electroshock tests meant to trigger extreme emotional output, memory drills, pain response measurements. All of this pushes Henry to refine his abilities, sharpen them, and eventually wield them with deadly accuracy. The key difference between Henry as a child and 01 as a test subject is discipline. Henry was raw power. 01 is refined power, focused power, power that knows exactly when to strike and when to disappear. This era also marks the beginning of 01's hatred hatred for Brenner, not a fiery hatred, but a cold and calculated one. Henry sees Brenner as a hypocrite. Brenner believes in order, structure, and progress, but he hides behind lies, manipulation, and fear. In Henry's worldview, Brenner represents the exact kind of corrupted human system he wants to destroy. Brenner is the first broken person in Henry's new ideology. Another important detail, 0I1 learns how to mask his emotions during this period. Brenner wants predictable behavior, so Henry learns how to simulate predictability. He acts obedient. He answers questions calmly. He follows rules, all while thinking, planning, and preparing for the moment he can finally make his move. This version of 0I is also the most physically human he will ever be in the canon. No burns, no vines, no twisted flesh, no monstrous transformation. He looks like a normal boy with a blank expression. That blankness becomes a mask. It is the expression he will later weaponize as Vecna, keeping his face still while forcing others into visions that break them mentally and physically. But what truly defines 0I at this stage is identity. Brenner tries to erase Henry Creel from existence. He wants a blank slate, a new creation, a controllable object, but Henry refuses to let go of the identity he's crafted for himself. The resentment against humanity grows. The belief that he stands above the system strengthens. By stripping away his identity, Brenner unintentionally gives him a new one built not from family or society, but from pure internal logic. 0I is the bridge between Henry Creel and Vecna, the moment where the ideology begins to harden. The moment where he realizes humanity has to be fixed. It's also here that 0I learns to see pain not as something to avoid, but something to use. When he understands how others break, he also understands how he can control them. Everything that happens in later years, the murders, the mind flayers' rise, the hive mind structure, can be traced back to this era. This is where Henry realizes that rules only matter when enforced by strong minds. And in his eyes, no mind is stronger than his own. 0I is not yet free. He is not yet fully formed, but he is sharpening his purpose. And when he's finally given an opportunity to move through the lab under a new identity, he will evolve into something even more dangerous. Next, 0I becomes the Orderly, and that's when the massacre begins to take shape in his mind. The lab Orderly. If 0I, the test subject, was a weapon in a cage, the Orderly version of him is that same weapon hiding in plain sight. The transition from prisoner to staff member is one of the most dangerous evolutions in Henry's entire timeline. This is where he learns how to manipulate people by pretending to be harmless. This is where he earns trust he never deserved. And this is where the seeds of the Hawkins lab massacre take root. The Orderly identity isn't a reward, it's a tactical decision by Brenner. Henry was too powerful to keep in a cell forever, and the more he pushed back, the more Brenner realized he needed Henry close to maintain control. Giving him a job inside the lab wasn't just a privilege, it was a leash. Brenner believed responsibility would soften Henry, calm him, make him feel included. But Henry didn't see it that way. The moment Henry puts on the white uniform, he becomes a ghost moving through the lab halls. He is invisible to the guards, beneath the suspicion of the scientists, and viewed by the children as a gentle presence. He observes every detail. He memorizes codes. He studies other subjects and their strengths. Most importantly, he studies 11. This version of Henry is the most manipulative, the most strategic. He speaks softly. He moves calmly. He keeps his face empty. He encourages the kids when they struggle. He wipes the blood from their noses after telepathy exercises. His words are kind, but they hide a brutal truth. He's looking for someone who can stand beside him, someone who can break the system with him. And he finds that potential in 11. The relationship between the Orderly and L is not based on kindness, it's based on calculation. Henry sees a younger version of himself in her, the fear, the confusion, the power she doesn't yet understand. He sees her potential and immediately starts shaping her. He becomes the only adult she feels safe around, not because he cares, but because he needs her to trust him. While the other kids see him as a support figure, Henry sees them as failures, weak, undisciplined, dependent. He observes their friendships and wonders why they cling to something so meaningless. He knows they're not strong enough to join him, they're not even strong enough to survive him. This era is also where Henry learns charm, not real charm, but the performance of it. He studies how people respond to kindness, how reassurance lowers defenses, how eye contact and gentle tone convince others you're safe. Everything he does is calculated, measured, and designed to get others to reveal themselves. For the first time, Henry is given freedom to move. He enters the testing rooms, the hallways, the training chambers, and with every step, he gathers data. He understands the lab's entire structure better than anyone inside it. He could escape at any time, but he doesn't. Because Henry doesn't want escape, he wants destruction. What he needs is a partner, a trigger, a crack in the system he can exploit. And 11 becomes that crack. She is young enough to be molded, powerful enough to be useful, and lonely enough to be manipulated. Henry slowly shapes her worldview, trying to pull her away from the other kids, pushing her to see Brenner's hypocrisy, and encouraging her to believe she is meant for more. He doesn't need her loyalty. He needs her emotional instability. Throughout this phase, Henry's resentment toward Brenner grows. He sees Brenner feeding false hope to the children. He sees him preach discipline while hiding behind fear. Henry watches Brenner break kids and call it progress. In Henry's mind, Brenner becomes the ultimate symbol of the flawed world he was destined to destroy. And then comes the turning point. The moment 11 rejects Henry's worldview, everything in him snaps. Henry realizes she won't stand beside him. She won't become his prodigy. Instead, she becomes a threat, someone who could challenge his authority or stop his plans. And that, for Henry, is unforgivable. This is when he reveals his true nature. The quiet orderly drops the mask and becomes the predator he always was. He manipulates the guards, he attacks, and then the massacre begins. This version of 001 is the most psychologically terrifying. Not because he kills, but because he does it without emotion, without satisfaction, without thrill. He cleanses the lab with the calmness of someone fixing a broken system. He sees the children as flawed prototypes created by Brenner, pale reflections of his true potential, and he removes them with clinical precision. But what makes the orderly version of Henry most important is not the massacre itself, it's how he reacts to 11 afterward. When she defeats him, Henry doesn't scream or panic, he studies her. Even while losing, he is learning, calculating, processing her power, and then he slips into a dimension no human has ever seen before except for him. The orderly version of 01 is the mask Henry used to infiltrate every part of Brenner's world. It's the persona that allowed him to learn how people think, trust, fear, and break. It is the version that evolves into the predator inside the Upside Down, because when 11 sends him there, Henry doesn't die. He transforms. Number 5. Damaged. 01. Proto-Vecna, 1979. The moment 11 sends Henry through the rift, something fundamental in him fractures. This version of 01 is not yet Vecna, but he's no longer human either. What emerges in Dimension X is a damaged, half-formed creature. Henry's mind is intact, but his body is dissolving and reforming at the same time. This is the first stage of the transformation. Henry arrives in a dimension with no rules, no structure, and no time. The air burns like static. The ground pulses under his feet. The whole place feels like a living memory that keeps rewriting itself. And for the first time in years, Henry feels fear and fascination. Not of pain, but of the unknown. This version of Henry is covered in scorched flesh. His veins. His left side is heavily damaged, almost melted, but even in this state, he refuses to collapse. This is where the predatory mind takes over. Henry doesn't see himself as a victim. He believes this world is another test, one he was meant to survive. And when he looks around, he sees a place with endless potential. The vines, the spores, the shifting landscape, the giant floating structures. Everything here operates on instinct and hunger. No order, no hierarchy. Henry decides he will give it both. This is the version seen in the 1979 flashbacks. Weak but thinking. Broken but evolving. He wanders the new dimension, studying its creatures, letting the environment shape him. Every wound becomes a pathway for the Upside Down's force to enter him. Every breath pulls more of the dimension into his cells. His body is the laboratory now. One of the most important traits in this stage is Henry's patience. He knows he's not strong enough to reshape the entire dimension yet, but he is strong enough to observe, copy, and adapt. He sees creatures like the Demogorgons. He watches Mind Flayer particles float like living thoughts. He learns that the entire world is connected by a neural network that pulses like a heartbeat. Some fans think he immediately becomes Vecna upon arrival, but this era shows the opposite. He grows into it, slowly, painfully. His human form collapses piece by piece until he becomes something new. In this phase, Henry doesn't speak. Not because he cannot, but because there is nothing in this world that requires language. Thought is enough. Hunger is enough. Purpose is enough. The Proto-Vecna stage is defined by self-reconstruction. Henry begins to mold his body to survive this world. Bone stretches, tissue regrows, his nervous system rewires. His strongest remaining human trait is his hatred. It drives everything he becomes. He sees Brenner in the shifting shapes of the dimension. He sees the children he massacred in his mind. He locks his focus on 11, the one who wounded him, the one who rejected him. His need for revenge becomes the core around which his new identity grows. But he doesn't rush. He spends years studying the dimension's structure, mapping its intelligence, molding it to his will. And that is the key difference here. The 1979 Proto-Vecna is not a monster yet. He is the architect, the builder, the thinker who will eventually shape the Mind Flayer out of raw particles and bend the entire Upside Down into a weapon. This version is the developing stage, the moment when Henry Creel dies in every way except one, his purpose. The damaged 001 you see in the flashbacks is the blueprint for everything that comes later, the human shell cracking open as Vecna begins to emerge. Number 6. Vecna, 1983, flashbacks. Version by 1983, Henry Creel is no longer the burned, broken creature crawling through a new dimension. He has rebuilt himself, he has adapted, and he now stands in a form that marks the midpoint between man and monster, something still vaguely human in shape, but unmistakably inhuman in presence. This version of Vecna looks closer to his 1986 form, since he carries mutations that didn't exist in 1979. His skin is covered in vines, patches of bioluminescent neon green glow beneath the skin. Henry Creel is no longer recognizable. The biggest shift between 1979 and 1983 is harmony. Henry and the Upside Down no longer feel like separate entities. The vines crawl over him, not as restraints, but as extensions. He can see through them, hear through them, think through them. Every organism in the dimension that operates on instinct alone becomes his eyes and ears. The 1983 Vecna version is like a scientist, not the Brenner type, who performs tests on unwilling subjects. Henry is different. He experiments on the dimension itself. He even infects Will with mind flayer particles, an irreversible action. He can feel the presence of strong minds, sensitive minds, like 11. He doesn't make contact yet. He isn't ready. But the psychic connection begins here. The drift toward Hawkins, the pull toward the girl who rejected him. Physically, this version of Vecna moves differently. His posture is more upright. He walks with a slow, deliberate gait like he is still adjusting to the new structural balance of his mutated body. His fingers are longer, more defined, tipped with hardened bone. His face remains expressive, subtle, but present. Emotionally, this is Henry at his coldest. He has shed nearly all human attachment. The loneliness he once felt is gone because the dimension fills that void. The anger he felt in 1979 has cooled into strategy. His hatred for Brenner sharpens into purpose. But the grudge that shapes him most is still directed at 11, not because she defeated him, but because she matched him. She became the one variable he cannot fully control. This stage marks the birth of the Predator, not the brute force monster of 1986, but a calculating, quiet hunter who is still evolving, still refining, still learning how to become the perfect apex mind. The 1983 Vecna is the moment Henry becomes inevitable. Number 7, Vecna, 1986, Season 4 version. This is the fully realized Vecna, the form Henry Creel grows into after years of evolution inside the Upside Down. By 1986, he is no longer transitioning, no longer adapting, no longer learning how the dimension works. He controls the dimension. The neon green nodes from 1983 have vanished. This version of Vecna stands tall, confident, and entirely stable. His movements are smooth, controlled, almost ritualistic. Everything about him in 1986 communicates power that has been mastered and sharpened. This is the Vecna that hunts teenagers and Hawkins through psychic gateways. This is the Vecna that cracks bones like brittle twigs. This is the Vecna that speaks in long, patient monologues. This is the Vecna that is finally ready to return home. The biggest shift between the 1983 and 1986 forms is his mastery over psychic infiltration. By this point, Vecna has perfected his ability to invade trauma, exploit guilt, and break a mind from the inside. He no longer searches for simply strong minds, he searches for fractured ones. Minds he can peel apart layer by layer. What makes this form terrifying is that he attacks with purpose. He doesn't want to simply kill his victims. He wants to ritualize them. His worldview crystallizes here. Humanity is flawed, weak, parasitic. The world is rotting from the inside, and Vecna sees himself as the one being capable of correcting it. The 1986 Vecna is also the version most tied to the physical layout of the Upside Down. He has set up a central lair. The vines obey his commands. The entire ecosystem pulses in response to his thoughts. When he's injured, the dimension reacts. When he feeds, the power spreads. The transformation of Chrissy, Fred, and Patrick is not random. Their deaths feed him. They strengthen the neural network he uses to rip open Hawkins. Every victim is a step closer to crossing the threshold. Emotionally, this Vecna carries absolute conviction. He believes he is right. He believes he is necessary. He believes he is evolution. And deep beneath all that certainty sits the same thing that shaped every version of Henry since childhood: resentment. Resentment toward Brenner, toward society, toward weakness, toward the world, toward 11, especially 11. She is the unfinished equation, the only being who proved he was not untouchable. His hatred for her is not childish spite, it is existential. She represents the only roadblock in his grand design, and her return to the fight forces him to accelerate his plan. When the party wounds him again in 1986, he doesn't die. He retreats, but he evolves again. Because this Vecna, like every version before him, never stops transforming. Number 8, Vecna, 1987, Season 5, final form. By 1987, Vecna has completed the final stage of his evolution. Every layer of Henry Creel has been stripped away, every human trace buried deep beneath the alien architecture of the Upside Down. What emerges is not just a monster or a villain, it is a godlike apex predator, the ultimate synthesis of mind, body, and dimension. Physically, this Vecna is both beautiful and horrifying. His humanoid shape is retained enough to make the connection to Henry Creel undeniable, but everything about his body is exaggerated. Limbs can stretch unnaturally long. His fingers taper into deadly talons. His skin has the texture of dead bark pieced together by vines. It seems as if his flash is non-existent, but is replaced by vines and spikes covering a bare skeleton, the culmination of years of absorbing the Upside Down's energy. Vines curl around him like living armor. His face is partially human, partially decayed, partially alien, with eyes that seem to see through every soul he encounters. But power is more than appearance. This is the Vecna that controls his environment with thought alone. Memories become tangible worlds. Psychologically, 1987, Vecna is the culmination of decades of calculation. He has distilled hatred, revenge, and intellect into one form. He understands human fear on a molecular level. He can craft illusions so precise they fracture the mind. He studies trauma, guilt, and sorrow, and uses them to break targets without leaving a physical mark. The fear he instills is total. The hopelessness he leaves behind is not accidental. It is an equation perfected through decades. Every kill now serves a dual purpose, feeding his power and preparing the world for the final stage of his plan. Each death is a node added to his dimensional web. Each nightmare deepens his control. The deaths of Chrissy, Patrick, Fred, and others are only the beginning. The 1987 Vecna is building a psychic network strong enough to overwrite reality itself. His relationship with Eleven evolves too. She is no longer simply a rival. She is the only anomaly he cannot fully predict. Every psychic duel taught him something, and every defeat only sharpened his strategy. He understands that Eleven's power complements his in strange ways, creating a feedback loop that could either destroy him or her, but in his mind, he is patient. He can wait centuries, if necessary. This is also the Vecna most directly tied to the Upside Down itself. He has merged his consciousness with the dimension to the point where it acts as a literal extension of his body. Vines and tendrils respond instantly to his thought. He moves through the Upside Down as if it were water. He exists everywhere and nowhere at once. Attempting to fight him with physical means is futile. The only realistic way to challenge him is on the psychic or dimensional plane. In essence, the 1987 Vecna represents the endgame, the ultimate evolution of Henry Creel from a lost boy to the first test subject, to the proto-monster, to a human-shaped predator, to a full-fledged reality-bending godlike entity. Every earlier version, Young Henry, 01, The Lab Orderly, Damaged Proto-Vecna, 1983 Vecna, and 1986 Vecna, was a step along this path. He is the apex, the predator, the architect of terror, the embodiment of the Upside Down's intent. And when he finally makes his move on Hawkins and the world, there is no turning back, no weapon, no humanity, no hope. Not unless someone like Eleven can rise to the challenge. The story of Vecna is not just about a monster. It is about the evolution of power, obsession, and revenge. From a boy in Nevada to a godlike terror in Hawkins, every stage of Henry Creel's life matters. Every scar, every calculation, every plan contributes to the final form that we see and fear in Season 5. Which version do you think is the most terrifying? Let us know in the comments. And if this deep dive into Vecna's evolution creeped you out or fascinated you, hit that like button and subscribe for more in-depth Stranger Things lore, because the story doesn't end here. The Upside Down is still alive and Vecna is still calculating.